Gregory Muna, aka Master Moo, and we're here with this week's edition of our weekly podcast. Art is the Church of God the Creator. And as always, we say that with a smile, but we say it because we mean it. In whatever sense that we invoke the big bad G word, the big good bad. What did William Blake, what was William Blake's locution? Nobodaddy, big bad Nobodaddy. That's paraphrased by my teacher, Allen Ginsberg. And today I'm going to give the sort of final installment of tribute to another one of my important teachers, John Cage, who passed away many years ago. And previously I was talking about Cage's concepts of structure in instrumental music, and for Cage, structure particularly in his composed phase before he started working with indeterminacy in the 50s, but straight through the late 1940s into the early 1950s, he had very exactly notated scores. So for Cage, in that first period of his maturity, structure was about rhythmic structure, and that is extremely important for me, for the music you're listening to in the background, all of that, which is completely structured. I try to extend that beyond the metronome, actually. I really try to work on the millisecond level. Or on, really the smallest level that I possibly can. That's the most valuable level for me artistically. But I just wanted to as a capstone to this discussion of John Cage, I wanted to talk about his sense of poetic rhythmic structure, which he developed more after the 1950s, later when he started to study Buddhism and started to, became more of a student of Eastern philosophy. And that really is intimately related to our relationship to breath. So when Cage began doing some sort of actual, like Zazen sitting practice, when we do our meditation practice, we're just present with our breathing, with our breath, with our out breath, and maintaining posture, and just the minimized sensory perceptions of what is immediately in front of us in the, in the Zendo or in our room, wherever we're meditating, and to minimize distractions. And then thoughts, as they come up, we simply label them thoughts. Thinking, we just acknowledge that the thinking process is going place, and then we return to the out breath. I think I'll be talking about this again probably on our next one. We start to again go back to our series of talks on the mandala principle and Dharma art, right? So this is kind of a bridge to that. But I wanted to read a section of the lecture on nothing, which was originally printed in Incontri Musicali in August 1959. And this is a fascinating example of the rhythmic structure in words, using semantic units, but trying to establish a rhythmic structure here and based upon breath, not based upon metronome. Just to backtrack for a second, the reason why the metronomic exactitude is so important in the earlier works is because Cage wanted, in his composition, in those determinate compositions like the string quartet and those things, for the listener to be clearly perceive the whole number relations of rhythmic units, to hear a rhythm, and that rhythmic principle is not just useful for the New York school music of the 1940s. I mean, it really extends way beyond that to anyone who wants to perform in tempo giusto, in non rubato, who wants to perform. And the classic example of that, and probably the most famous example in sort of classical music, is Glenn Gould. Maybe we'll talk sometime about how Glenn Gould used that concept of exact proportional rhythms in his final recording of the Goldberg Variations, because Gould worked on that piece his entire life. He recorded it in his 20s and he re-recorded it just before his death. And his final recording is really his testament of rhythmic structure, and it's really the same concept as John Cage's rhythmic structure, and it's really very, very dear to my heart. I think it's a tragedy that Gould died as young as he did. We never got to hear the incredible work that he undoubtedly would have done with the Art of Fugue. So we can just listen to that in our mind's ears and imagine that in musical heaven. Okay, so I'm just going to read a few pages, and I'm going to try to follow John Cage's rhythmic instructions. So this would be a performance of John Cage's lecture on nothing, and I'll just give a little quick background. This lecture was printed in Incontri Musicali, August 1959. There are 4 measures in each line and 12 lines in each unit of the rhythmic structure. So while I'm reading that, I'm going to try to articulate the 4 columns and the 12 lines so that we can hear the rhythmic structure of the words. So the subtitle of today's topic is Rhythmic Structure in Cage's Poetics. Rhythmic structure in Cage's Poetics, because this is a poetic work, but it's rhythmically structured. And I want us to be able to connect this to the ideas of rhythmic structure as discussed in Aristotle's Poetics. Aristotle talks about, the traditional hexameters and, the traditional meters and rhyme structures of Greek poetry, epic poetry, tragic poetry, and in drama. Okay. Once again, there are 4 measures in each line and 12 lines in each unit of the rhythmic structure. And again, Cage was not a 12-tone composer in any normative sense of the word. Of course, he did study with, of course, the greatest 20th century composer, Arnold Schoenberg, in Los Angeles, but it should be reminded that what he studied was basic musicianship. What Schoenberg did not teach the college students his 12-tone technique. He only taught college students traditional harmony, counterpoint, the same stuff that you have at every college. Forms, sonata form, stuff like that. The 12-tone, the secrets of 12-tone technique he just kept for private students, and and that was sort of a very exclusive group. Okay, but those referential 12ness still seems to be very important in all of Cage's rhythmic structures. So I don't know, but for me, there's a significant sort of nexus there. I think that Cage was groping towards the idea of a rhythmic structure which could integrate with the pitch structures of 12-tone music, and Cage took a different direction in his life, so it really fell upon others to really climb that mountain. Those others, obviously the greatest of which was Milton Babbitt, who I also had the privilege of studying with, and then on a much lower level of achievement, I mean Messiaen, Boulez, Stockhausen, and like the whole Darmstadt school. I don't mean to cast dispersions, but I mean, none of them achieve the deep level of rhythmic integration that one can hear and also analyze in the works of Babbitt and Warren and other now sadly underappreciated and or denigrated masters of 20th century composition. All right. Getting back to the structure of the lecture on nothing, there are 12 lines in each unit of rhythmic structure, and there are 48 such units, each having 48 measures. So the 48, the 12 times 4 is 48. And again, to explicitly draw out this analogy between rhythmic structure and pitch structure, in 12-tone composition, we have the 12 tones in a matrix, and there are 4 manifestations or 4 aspects of the same unity, which is the prime, the inversion, the retrograde, and the retrograde inversion. So you get 4 times 12. You have 12 tones, 12 transpositions at 12 levels of transpositions, and each times 4 manifestations, sort of, the prime, the inversion, the retrograde, and the retrograde inversion, right? Depending on how you read that. Of course, there are other ways of reading that matrix. Stravinsky sort of revolutionized the whole thing by sort of turning the matrix on its side and then reading down the 0 axis and creating canons, and that was the sort of the extraordinary cornerstone of late Stravinsky's polyphonic technique in his late works. His works after the mid-1950s until his death. All right. Anyway, get back to this. So the 48 to me is related to the 4 forms of the 12 transpositions. That's my quixotic interpretation of that. Okay. The whole is divided into 5 large parts. So there are sort of 5 movements of this large work in the proportion of 7, 6, 14, 14, 7. So let's listen for those. So that's interesting. 7, 6, 14, 14, 7. He uses multiples of 7, which is great because it creates a kind of irregularity against the multiples of 2 and 3 in the 12 and the 48, obviously. And that comports very much with my way of musical thinking. I'm a 7 limit person in a special sense, in the sense of the blues, as I've said before. For me, the 7 limit universe is the blues universe, and it's restricted in it's smaller than the 5 limit universe, but it's also much richer in some real senses, because as we've discussed before, and sort of my take on the harmony of Tristan, it allows us to hear the 7th chord in a root tonic position, allows us to hear, as opposed to simply the dominant 7th, and like on the 5th degree. So, the 48, getting back to the preamble to the lecture, the 48 measures of each unit are likewise so divided. Okay, so the 48 measures of each unit are also divided into subdivisions of 7, 6, 14, 14, 7. I hope in my reading I'll be able to bring out some of these subdivisions. And I'm not going to read the whole lecture because that would go beyond our time limit, but I'll read a fair chunk of it, and so you'll hear some of these rhythmic structures. The text is printed in 4 columns to facilitate a rhythmic reading. Okay, now this is where we're really getting to the heart of Cage's idea of a rhythmicized poetics of words, poetics in the modern sense of just of words, and poetry. Each line is to be read across the page from left to right, not down the columns in sequence. This should not be done in an artificial manner, which might result from an attempt to be too strictly faithful to the position of the words on the page, but with the rubato which one uses in everyday speech. So here, this is the critical difference, the rubato which one uses in everyday speech. So Cage is proposing an alternate approach to rhythm here, which is breath-based and speech-based. And I think it relates to our sitting practice and awareness of breath. And as opposed to a strictly tempo giusto metronomic clock time. Okay, and I will just mention very briefly in passing that the rhythmic structures which and a lot of the pitch structures which Babbitt used in his vocal music, like the great Philomel, and maybe I'll have a chance to discuss that, some of Babbitt's incredible combinations of electronics and voice, phonemena, so on. Even when he was working with very, very strictly determined rhythmic structures in the electronics, he had a very free approach toward vocal lines. He really set vocal lines in a way which was very free and very concerned with word painting and all of that. So that really flies in the face of people who think of him as being sort of like cold and unexpressive. I think there's a tremendous amount of poetic expression, and I think Babbitt was, like Cage, actually extremely sensitive to poetic texts, although they responded to a different universe of poetic texts. I mean, for Cage, the summa of his poetic interest was certainly the Finnegan's Wake of James Joyce. I mean, Cage was a straight-up Joycean, and in the same, very much the same way that Feldman is very much a disciple of Babbitt. I mean, of Beckett, Samuel Beckett. Thinking about Samuel Beckett because Waiting for Godot is on Broadway, and let me know if you know how to find a way to get good tickets. Comment here on the chat thread. Okay, so here we go. First half of Lecture on Nothing, John Cage, 1959. I am here, and there is nothing to say. Those who wish to get somewhere, if among you are those who wish to get somewhere, let them leave at any moment. Which we require is silence. But what silence requires is that I go on talking. Give any one thought a push. It falls down easily. But the pusher and the pushed produce that entertainment called a discussion. Shall we have one later? Or we could simply decide not to have a discussion, whatever you like. But now, there are silences, and the words help make the silences. I have nothing to say, and I am saying it. And that is poetry, as I need it. This space of time is organized. We need not fear these silences. We may love them. This is a composed talk, for I am making it just as I make a piece of music. It is like a glass of milk. We need the glass and we need the milk. Or again, it is like an empty glass into which at any moment anything may be poured as we go along. Who knows? An idea may occur in this talk. I have no idea whether one will or not. If one does, let it. Regard it as something seen momentarily, as though from a window while traveling. If across Kansas, then of course Kansas. Arizona is more interesting, almost too interesting, especially for a New Yorker who is being interested in spite of himself in everything. Now he knows he needs the Kansas in him. Kansas is like nothing on earth. And for a New Yorker, very refreshing. It is like an empty glass. Nothing but wheat. Is it corn? Does it matter which? Kansas has this about it. At any instant, one may leave it. And whenever one wishes, one may return to it. You may leave it forever and never return to it, for we possess nothing. Our poetry now is the realization that we possess nothing. Anything, therefore, is a delight, since we do not possess it, and thus need not fear its loss. We need not destroy the past. It is gone. At any moment, it might reappear and seem to be, and be the present. Would it be a repetition? Only if we thought we owned it. But since we don't, it is free. And so are we. Most anybody knows about the future and how uncertain it is. What I am calling poetry is often called content. I myself have called it form. It is the continuity of a piece of music. Continuity today, when it is necessary, is a demonstration of disinterestedness. That is, it is a proof that our delight lies in not possessing anything. Each moment presents what happens. how different this form sense is from that which is bound up with memory. Themes and secondary themes, their struggle, their development, the climax, the recapitulation, which is the belief that one may own one's home. But actually, unlike the snail, we carry our homes within us, which enables us to fly or to stay, to enjoy each. But beware of that which is breathtakingly beautiful, for at any moment the telephone may ring, or the airplane may come down in a vacant lot. A piece of string or a sunset, possessing neither. Each acts, and the continuity happens. Nothing more than nothing can be said. Hearing or making this in music is not different, only simpler than living this way. Simpler, that is, for me, because it happens that I write music. That music is simple to make, comes from one's willingness to accept the limitations of structure. Structure is simple because it can be thought out, figured out, measured. It is a discipline which, accepted in return, accepts whatever, even those rare moments of ecstasy, which, as sugar loaves train horses, train us to make what we make. How could I better tell what structure is than simply to tell about this talk, which is contained within a space of time approximately 40 minutes long. That 40 minutes has been divided into 5 large parts, and each unit is divided likewise. Subdivision involving a square root is the only possible subdivision which permits this macro cosmic rhythmic structure, which I find so acceptable and accepting. As you see, I can say anything, and it makes very little difference what I say, or even how I say it. At this particular moment, we are passing through the 4th part of a unit, which is the 2nd unit in the 2nd large part of this talk. It is a little bit like passing through Kansas. This now is the end of that second part. Now begins the third unit of the second part. Now the second part of that third unit. Now its third part. Now its fourth part, which is, by the way, is just the same length as the third part. Now the fifth and last part. You have just experienced the structure of this talk from a microcosmic point of view. From a macrocosmic point of view, we are just passing the halfway point in the second large part. The first part was a rather rambling discussion of nothing, of form and continuity, when it is the way we now need it. This second part is about structure, how simple it is, what it is, and why we should be willing to accept its limitations. Most speeches are full of ideas. This one doesn't have to have any, but at any moment, an idea may come along. Then we may enjoy it. Structure without life is dead, but life without structure is unseen. Pure life expresses itself within and through structure. Each moment is absolute, alive and significant. Blackbirds rise from a field, making a sound, delicious, beyond compare. All right, I'll draw the line after this large section here and make a couple of brief comments. So this is a lecture on nothing, which I mean is both cognate with the Zen concept of the void, the shunyata of emptiness, right? But also nothingness in the existential sense. I mean, I guess going back to Heidegger, you know, who I'm paraphrasing from the German, who famously said that why does anything, the question, you know, the Ur question, according to Heidegger, why does anything exist at all rather than nothing? Why does anything exist rather than nothing? And of course, Samuel Beckett's axiom, which I believe he adapted from pre-Socratic, from what, Zeno or Heraclitus. I'll have to check that. He said nothing, according to Samuel Beckett, and this appears several times in his plays and novels, that nothing is more real than nothing. And of course, that's a paradoxical statement. Nothing is more real than nothing. And Cage references those sort of philosophical and theological ideas of nothing in a few times when in relation to his Poetics, when he says, I just want to repeat a couple of these key phrases that are particularly meaningful to me. And he says, I have nothing to say, and I am saying it. And that is poetry. Let's just say that again. Everyone, all together. I have nothing to say, and I am saying it. And that is poetry. Okay, and of course the nothing in poetry is the pauses between words, which is a natural outgrowth of the breath. So when we are reading poetically, we are constantly aware of our breath. We're constantly aware of our breath as it comes in and out of our body. We're aware of our posture. We're aware of the physical formation of the consonants and vowels inside of our body, and the vibration from our larynx and the air that propels it outwards. One last time, all together, everyone. 1, 2, 3. I have nothing to say, and I am saying it. And that is poetry. A couple of other, I think, really key phrases from this talk that I want to just reiterate. His discussion of Kansas. Very true in my experience. And driven cross country and spent several days in Kansas. Visited the places associated with my wife's childhood, and very beautiful, remote, the border of Kansas and southern Nebraska. So I just wanted to repeat his little sort of Zen inflected praise here. While traveling, if across Kansas, then of course Kansas. He says, Arizona is more interesting, almost too interesting, especially for a New Yorker who's being interested in spite of himself in everything. Now he knows he needs the Kansas in him. Kansas is like nothing on earth, and for a New Yorker, very refreshing. It is like an empty glass, nothing but wheat. Is it corn? Does it matter which? Kansas has this about it. At any instant, one may leave it, and whenever one wishes, one may return to it. Isn't that beautiful? Kansas has this about it. At any instant, one may leave it, and whenever one wishes, may return to it. Perhaps Cage was making a slightly puckish, humorous reference to The Wizard of Oz. You know, Dorothy leaves Kansas, and then whenever she wishes, she can return. I think it's a very beautiful sentiment, and very true in my experience of being a New Yorker who has an appreciation for the sort of the vast spaces of Kansas, as he says, like an empty glass. Yeah. And then he has some further comments about the relationship between structure in poetry versus structure in music, which is very important to me because as a composer of song, the fusion of word and music is of paramount importance, and they have different parameters because word is physical, it's enunciated, it's carried on the breath, and of course music making is also physical in the bodies of the musicians, but it's is much more has a different rhythmic structure, right? And so he makes a comment about sonata form, which I'm sure you all picked up, but I would just like to point that out, what he says here. He's contrasting what he calls contemporary ideas of continuity and form with previous. So to draw that contrast, he says, how different this form sense, when he says this form sense, he means contemporary form sense in what he's doing, in using this type of predetermined rhythmic structure, right? And with traditionally taught academic forms. And so here he gives an outline of sonata form. He says, how different this form sense is from that which is bound up with memory, themes and secondary themes, their struggle, their development, the climax, the recapitulation, which is the belief that one may own one's home. But actually, unlike the snail, we carry our homes within us, which enables us to fly or to stay, to enjoy each. Okay, so that may be interpreted as a disparaging comment towards the sort of first Viennese school, classical music sonata form, as being based upon memory. I mean, he's trying to establish forms which are not memory based, in which we're not constantly, because the idea is that that's taking us out of the present moment. That's true in terms of a naive listenership to music. If you're just waiting for like the big theme to make its big return, its big recapitulation, its big grandiose climax, as in the heroicized, dramatized, narrativized sonata forms of middle and late Beethoven, right? Yeah, that could be a problem. You could have the listener just sort of spacing out and waiting for the big moment. And I think that is a lot of what too many concert goers do in the music, in the concert situation. You just sit there and wait for your big treat. He says this is like we're trained to do this the way, he says, as sugar loaves train horses. And he's as Cage says, beware of that which is breathtakingly beautiful, for at any moment the telephone may ring. That's just very funny, because that's exactly what's true in the concert hall. You're waiting for your breathtakingly beautiful moment, and then somebody's cell phone goes off and ruins it. Yeah. But he says, or the airplane comes down in a vacant lot. He concludes this section with a very beautiful sort of haiku-like poetic image when he says, and I'll just repeat this because it bears repeating, a piece of string or a sunset, possessing neither. Each acts, and the continuity happens. Nothing more than nothing can be said. Isn't that beautiful? A piece of string or a sunset, possessing neither. Each acts, and the continuity happens. Nothing more than nothing can be said. He returns back to his theme of nothingness. And what he is proposing is establishing a type of structure in which we can just relax and experience each moment. And that even if there are those breathtakingly beautiful moments, we don't have to fetishize them, but we can maintain a continuity of attention. And this is what I strive to create in my determinate music structures. I'm a determinate composer. I'm not an indeterminate composer. Every micro millisecond is determined in my pieces, but I am trying to go for the same continuous flow of attention that Cage is speaking of here, even though he is talking about opening up to to indeterminacy in a certain level. So I'm trying to make this connection. Again, what Cage has to say here, hearing or making this in music is not different, only simpler than living this way. He says, simpler that is for me because it happens that I write music. He says that music is simple to make, comes from one's willingness to accept the limitations of structure. Okay? That if you accept the limitations of structure, if you establish a structure that you believe in, then you submit yourself to the discipline of that. I think that's very important. Structure is simple because it can be thought out, figured out, measured. It is a discipline accepted, which accepted in return accepts whatever, even those rare moments of ecstasy, which as sugar loaves train horses, train us to make what we make. No. Sure, there are those big climaxes, and those are moments of ecstasy, and those keep us going, but that's not the only thing going on in music. There is a continuity. There is a flow. Yeah. And the final little pull-out quote here that I want us to discuss and sort of end on is this idea, I think, connecting again breath, which is the fundamental truth of our existence. We are creatures that respire. We take in air and we expel air, and this is the fact that we are alive at this moment. So, the final section, when he says, structure without life is dead, but life without structure is unseen. Pure life expresses itself within and through structure. Each moment is absolute, alive, and significant. Blackbirds rise from a field making a sound, delicious and beyond compare. That's a very beautiful, sort of poetic capstones. Blackbirds rise from a field making a sound, delicious, beyond compare. Very much like Wallace Stevens, 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird, right? Maybe we'll discuss Wallace Stevens, or maybe read some Wallace Stevens. That would be great. When Cage says each moment is absolute, alive, and significant, he means each moment, not only each moment of our lives, but of course each moment of sonic perception. So each moment that we are taking in sounds in the form of words or of just instrumental sound is alive and significant. And it is structure that makes it alive and significant. So I think with that, I'll come to the end of my multi-part tribute to John Cage. I've been reading sections from his book of lectures, Silence, and I recommend it, Wesleyan University Press, 1969. As a follow-up on our previous discussion of the new opera Cavalier and Clay, I've re-listened to it a couple of times now, and there's really just not enough meat on the bone for me to give an appreciative commentary, and I'm sorry to say. So I hope you engage with it on a much more deeply meaningful and in a joyful way. And it was enjoyable, but for me, not in a way which merits any sort of analytical discussion. So I'll just leave it at that. And I think that'll be all for today. And so I just wanted to thank you for joining me in our tribute to the great late John Cage and his lecture on nothing from 1959. Okay, so that'll be it for today for this week's episode of Art is the Church of God the Creator. See you soon.